The Where Our Minds Wander podcast may contain sensitive content and explicit language. Listener discretion is advised. Greetings, fellow wanderers, to the places our minds wander.
The house at the end of the dirt road, where disembodied voices whisper and strange sounds make the living shiver.
Where shadows lurk at the edge of the woods, just outside your back door. And mysterious lights speed beyond reason across the clear night sky.
Odd events throughout time that lead you down the rabbit hole.
I'm Wes.
And I'm Beth.
And this is Where Our Minds Wander. Hello and welcome to Where Our Minds Wander, all you fellow wanderers. Thank you for joining us.
Hello, everyone.
It's so awesome to be back in this studio on a Sunday.
It is.
It's really nice and cool in here compared to outside because it's getting hotter than all hell. And we have a heat advisory for Monday and Tuesday where it's going to get into the hundreds, supposedly.
And it's not a dry 100, it's a humid 100, which is 1,000 times worse.
Right. And I know a lot of you out there in the hot states are saying, oh, 100's not bad. Well, it is here. New York State, we rarely get into the hundreds. And it's a whole different kind of hot.
It's a humid hot.
Yeah. In Texas, well, I kind of didn't get used to it. But it was nice because, well, we drank a lot of Coors beer.
Well, there you go.
Kind of helped.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Except if you're like me and you get a little drunk and you fall asleep in your lounge chair and burn to all hell and then peel for the next month and a half.
That sounds awesome.
Burn to all hell. It was awful.
Were the hairs on your legs even bleached?
I lost feeling in my legs. The burns were so bad on my thighs.
Wow.
Yeah.
That is pretty bad.
But enough of me burning in the sun. And I tan really well. Not like you. You go outside for 5 minutes and, you could be sweating a bucket and you'd be red as a lobster.
I know. I become a lobster girl after just a few minutes.
Casper just doesn't tan.
That was my nickname when I worked at Cape Air when I was in college. That's what they called me.
I know, you told me.
Yes, because everybody had a suntan, and I was beyond pale, and yeah, that was my nickname.
Yeah, you're white and freckly. Not a good combination for the sun.
Oh, that's not what... I thought your sentence was just going to end after not a good combination.
Nope. So we have a really good episode for you tonight, and I know we say that once in a while, but this one, I'm sure you've all heard about this person, but we want to do our take on it.
Yes, we did.
Because I think we bring something a little different to it.
Well, I hope so.
So with that said, I think we'll skip any housekeeping tonight, and we'll get into it.
Okay, so you and I have a habit of marathoning entire television series, right? And then we run out of things to watch. So recently that happened, and we started over with season 1 of Supernatural, which we've watched from beginning to end years ago. And this time around, when we got to the episode that features Robert Johnson, remember I said to you, why haven't we done Robert Johnson yet? It's such a great story.
Well, I said, well, everybody's heard of it. So what could we bring new to this topic?
Well, that was my goal, was to bring something new.
I know, I love the Robert Johnson story. And I'm willing to bet that many of you out there have already heard about the Robert Johnson story. And I'm also willing to bet that, like us, you probably figured that there's been so many retellings of the legend that it's kind of overtaken the actual life story of the blues musician. And like us, You may have wondered, what was his real life like?
But if you haven't heard the legend of Robert Johnson and the deal he made with the devil at the Crossroads, then you're probably wondering what the heck we're talking about. Either way, you're in luck tonight because we're going to delve into both parts of the story. So first, let's start with the legend. Robert Johnson wanted, more than anything, to be a great blues musician, but he just wasn't very good. One night, as he rambled around Rosedale, Mississippi, he was despondent and depressed over his inability to play the guitar that he carried around with him. Feeling desperate, he found himself at the Crossroads, where highways 1 and 8 meet. Waiting for him there was a rather large man who took his guitar from him, expertly tuned it, and then played a few tunes before handing it back to Johnson. As Johnson took back his guitar, the deal with the devil was sealed. He would be a great blues guitarist, but at the price of his soul. 6 months later, Johnson returned to the Delta as one of the greatest blues musicians of all time. There's another version of the legend where Johnson went to a graveyard rather than the Crossroads to sell his soul. But either way, after his meeting with the devil, Johnson became one of the best blues players of all time, like I said, strongly influencing the likes of Chuck Berry, Eric Clapton, Robert Plant, Bob Dylan, and Keith Richards.
And who knows how many, many more.
Dozens more. And it's a rather simple story, one that's been told many times before Robert Johnson was even born. If you've heard of Faust, then you know that that's true. Faust was published in 1790. But what if Johnson really did go to the Crossroads and make a deal? How would he know what to do? It seems like he didn't. In many versions of the story, all Johnson had to do was play his guitar in frustration while standing at the Crossroads, and the devil just simply appeared. But why a crossroads? Historians have debated for a very long time where the crossroads myth even originated. But crossroads were an important part of ancient Greek mythology. Both Hecate and Hermes are tied to crossroads, and celebrations of all different types were held at them to honor both gods. In African hoodoo, the crossroads symbolizes the rising and setting of the sun, as well as the life cycle of death and rebirth. At the center of the crossroads is a timeless space where one can speak to the spirits. In West African folklore, the trickster deity Eshu Elegba lives at the crossroads. And then in medieval Great Britain, there was the tradition of burying criminals and suicides at the crossroads. On one hand, it was done because crossroads marked the boundaries of settlements. But on the other hand, it was believed that many roads could confuse the dead. Crossroads were often popular places to punish and execute criminals. That practice continued all the way up until 1823. Over the years, several different places in Mississippi have claimed to be the home of the actual crossroads where Robert Johnson sold his soul. There's Rosedale, Mississippi, as I'd mentioned, but there's also Clarksdale, Dockery Plantation, and Beulah. According to visitclevelandms.com, Dockery Plantation in Cleveland, Mississippi, is historically significant because it was a major hub for Delta blues musicians. During his lifetime, as Johnson wandered from town to town trying to play his music, the established musicians at Dockery openly ridiculed his less than mediocre playing. The Crossroads, about a mile east of the plantation, is on a dirt road, which leads many historians, or at least believers in the legend, to support the idea that this was the fateful meeting place. But then there's Rosedale. Johnson actually mentions the Rosedale Crossroads in his song Traveling Riverside Blues, and Rosedale was also a major blues town. Some people believe that Johnson was traveling from Dockery Plantation to Rosedale when he met up with the devil. Clarksdale, Mississippi, often called the birthplace of the blues, is also a popular contender, specifically the intersection of Highways 49 and 61. And lastly, Beulah. Since it's generally accepted that Johnson often traveled between Dockery Plantation and Rosedale, it makes sense that if he traveled by the Peavine Railroad train, he would have stopped off in Beulah. There is a crossroads connecting Beulah to Rosedale, and it happens to be out in the middle of nowhere. This was the one actually used during the filming of the movie Crossroads in 1986.
Is that the one with Ralph Macchio, the Karate Kid?
I think so. I've never seen it. But why is Ralph Macchio in a movie about Robert Johnson? Like, what character did he play?
I don't remember.
It was that good, huh?
It was the 1980s.
Now, if you think that's a lot of what-ifs already when it comes to the legend of Robert Johnson, as far as even where the crossroads could be, you haven't heard anything yet. There's also a lot of mystery around Johnson's actual life story, his death, and where he's actually buried. According to Guitar.com, Johnson was born Robert Leroy Johnson around May 8, 1911, in Hazelhurst, Mississippi. Prior to his birth, his mother, Julia Dodds, was married to a man named Charles Dodds. They had 10 children. At some point, Dodds fled Mississippi to Memphis, Tennessee, in order to escape a lynch mob. Julia and their 10 children stayed behind. Dodds changed his last name to Spencer and had 2 more children with another woman. In his absence, Julia met Noah Johnson, and the 2 of them were Robert's parents. When Robert was little, his mother and Charles Dodds Spencer reconciled for a little while. They all moved to Memphis. But before long, Julia and all of the kids moved back to Mississippi. Eventually, Julia did get married again to a man named Dusty Willis, who was 24 years younger than she was. Throughout his young life, Robert Johnson's family were sharecroppers, a life that Robert didn't want for himself. According to MagnoliaTribune.com, at some point, Robert began playing music in various juke joints. He was pretty good at the jaw harp and the harmonica. He also tried out all kinds of different names for himself, using both of his stepfather's surnames, plus a few more, like Moore and Barstow, before settling on his biological father's last name. At one point, he was Robert Spencer, and then at another, everyone called him Little Robert Dusty. In 1920, he showed up on the Lucas, Arkansas census as Robert Spencer again. In 1929, when Johnson was around 18 years old, he married 16-year-old Virginia Travis. Soon, Virginia was pregnant with their first child. Johnson still wanted to make a name for himself, but he quit playing and got work on a plantation. According to the Magnolia Tribune, his music was, quote, novice at best, noisy at worst, and the crowds were annoyed by the sound of his strumming bouncing off the walls, end quote.
That's not a good review.
No, that's pretty harsh. So maybe at the time it didn't really matter that he quit playing. It was more important to him that he provide for his young family. Virginia went back to her family to wait for the baby to come. Around her 8th month, Johnson decided he better get to her so he didn't miss the birth of his child. He arrived to discover that both Virginia and the baby had died in childbirth, and they were already buried. There's some speculation that Virginia's family actually blamed Johnson's music playing for her death. Since he didn't play religious songs, he was already, quote, selling his soul to the devil. After the death of his family, Johnson decided that he was going to become a famous musician no matter what. He fully embraced the itinerant musician's lifestyle, traveling from juke joint to juke joint. It's known that after watching more established musicians play, like Son House and Charlie Patton, he'd jump up on stage and try to mimic them, except he did it rather badly. He knew that if he wanted to make it big, he'd have to learn to play the guitar and be the best guitar player around. Johnson was living in Robinsonville at that point, and in a twist of fate, Son House actually moved to the same town. Johnson begged House to be his mentor and teach him. House tried, but according to Guitar.com, during one performance, an audience member begged House to go up on stage and take the boy's guitar away from him.
Oh, the poor guy.
I know.
He had already been through hell, and now he's going through this kind of humiliation.
Yeah.
But the good thing is, he persisted. He didn't stop.
That's true. He did not give up. And this is when the first glimmer of the legend actually began, because at this point, Johnson disappeared from Robinsonville. And when he returned 6 months later, he had not only mastered the blues guitar and obtained the ability to sing, he was doing things with the guitar that no one had ever heard before. It was said that he could sound like an entire band while he played, even though it was just him and his guitar. Now, the Crossroads legend didn't just affect Robert Johnson. There were actually a handful of other blues musicians who garnered the same kind of attention, like Ike Zimmerman. It was said that Zimmerman used to play his guitar in the graveyard, and that one night the devil himself had visited Zimmerman in the cemetery, and the two had struck a deal. Well, it turns out that when Johnson disappeared from Robinsonville, he actually went to Arkansas and not only befriended Ike Zimmerman, he actually lived with him for a year and a half. Not 6 months, like the legend says. 18 months. According to Guitar.com, one of Zimmerman's daughters confirmed that Robert Johnson, quote, asked my daddy to teach him how to play guitar, and my daddy taught him. He lived there with my daddy. He stayed a long time, end quote. And the two of them really did play in graveyards. Not because they were trying to contact the devil, but because it was quiet. There was great acoustics, and nobody bothered them while they were out there.
Well, I can imagine it's nice and peaceful. You've got that good country air. I mean, it's a great place to play.
And I had read somewhere, too, that one of the reasons they played out there was because Johnson was so bad that Zimmerman didn't want to be caught teaching him.
Right. Yeah, I've heard that, too.
But people talk, of course, and the idea of a blues band making a deal with the devil was kind of a popular belief at the time. It was almost like being part of an elite club if you were talked about like that. So, allegedly, Johnson embraced all the things that people were saying about him.
Well, why not? They were going to say it anyway, so why not just go with it?
Yeah, he never denied it, but he also never came right out and said it was true either. He let his fast and rough personal life speak for itself. First, Johnson was a known alcoholic who suffered from bouts of anger and depression. He would go into periods of moodiness and darkness that often ended with him taking off for another town. He was also a known womanizer, and he would disappear for weeks at a time, so that many of the women who cared about him didn't know where he was or if he was ever coming back. This included his second wife, Coletta Craft, whom he married in 1931. And he kinda added to the devil legend himself by including all kinds of references to both the devil and the Crossroads in his music. For example, in his song, Me and the Devil Blues, he sang, "Early this morning when you knocked upon my door, and I said, 'Hello, Satan, I believe it's time to go.' Me and the devil was walking side by side. Me and the devil was walking side by side." Or on his song Crossroads, in which he sang, "I went to the crossroad, fell down on my knees. I went to the crossroad, fell down on my knees. Ask the Lord above, have mercy now, save poor Bob if you please. Yes, standing at the crossroad, tried to flag a ride. I tried to flag a ride. Didn't nobody seem to know me, babe. Everybody passed me by." And then there's one more example, which people who believe in the legend, of course, are constantly pointing to the lyrics, saying he was even singing about the crossroads and the devil. This one is from Hellhound on My Trail. I gotta keep moving, I gotta keep moving. Blues falling down like hail, blues falling down like hail. And the days keeps on worrying me. There's a hellhound on my trail. Hellhound on my trail, hellhound on my trail. You can see where people think that there's some truth to it.
Yeah, you could see people at that time would be like, oh, he's definitely in with the devil. He definitely made a deal.
Right.
And he's black.
Right.
So not a good time.
Right.
You know?
And blues music in general was considered the music of the devil.
Right.
Yes. So Johnson recorded his first 16 songs during one session in a San Antonio, Texas hotel room in 1936. His producer, Don Law, went on to produce people like Johnny Cash. His first record was a minor hit, and in 1937, he met up with Law again, only this time in Dallas. Now, I thought this was pretty interesting from the Guitar.com article. They said that at the time, producers would speed up the blues recordings to give them more energy because the songs were kind of slow. And in 2010, music engineers determined that Robert Johnson's songs were sped up by as much as 20% on his recordings. So in real life, when people went to hear him perform, his songs were even slower and darker than they are on the records.
That's awesome.
Isn't that interesting?
Yeah, it's too bad they sped them up 20% because I think they probably lost some of their oomph.
Well, some of their feeling.
Right.
Yeah, for sure. So altogether, he only recorded 29 songs before his mysterious death in Greenwood, Mississippi. And we'll get into that after this quick break. Hey, did you know? It's time for some more amazing facts about space. If you drilled a tunnel through Earth and jumped in, you would reach the other side in 42 minutes and 12 seconds, and your top speed would be 17,670 miles per hour. Driving a car to the nearest star at 70 miles per hour would take more than 356 billion years. According to scientists, over 100 tons of space dust falls to Earth every day, some of which lands in your hair. The biggest volcano in the solar system, which is on Mars, is 374 miles across, so about the size of Arizona. It's 16 miles high, or triple the height of Mount Everest, and volume-wise, it's 100 times larger than Earth's largest volcano, Mauna Loa in Hawaii. And finally, Psyche 16, an asteroid between Mars and Jupiter, is made entirely of iron, nickel, and gold. Its estimated metal value is 10,000 quadrillion dollars. That's 10 with 19 zeros after it. Who'da thunk it?
All right, we're back from the break, and I'm going to jump into the mysterious death of Robert Johnson, because it's the second mystery surrounding the musician. Why did he die on August 18th, 1938, at age 27? Because, believe it or not, Robert Johnson was the first member of the infamous 27 Club. Now, I'm assuming that you've all heard of this, the strange number of famous musicians and actors who died at the age of 27. The group includes Jimi Hendrix, Janis Joplin, Jim Morrison, Brian Jones, Kurt Cobain, Amy Winehouse, and Robert Johnson. But why he died still isn't truly known, or at least people do have some questions about it. All that's really known was that he played a gig outside of Greenwood on August 15th, and then 3 days later, he was dead. Now, there is some speculation that he died inside the Three Forks Bar in Banks, Mississippi. But there was no autopsy, although the coroner put syphilis as the cause of death. Some people have speculated that cirrhosis of the liver or alcohol poisoning were to blame, although others claim that poisoned alcohol was really what did it. Because yes, there's even a legend about Robert Johnson's death. The legend is that a jealous husband, perhaps one of the Three Forks owners, wanted revenge on Johnson for sleeping with his wife, so he put poison in a little bottle of whiskey that Johnson drank. Strychnine was suggested, and since some reports claim that Johnson writhed in severe pain for 3 days before he passed away, that could be the case. But experts have argued that strychnine has such a strong odor and taste that there's no way Johnson would have consumed any of it without noticing. And if he hadn't noticed it, it would have killed him within hours, not days. Others propose that it was naphthalene from dissolved mothballs. Apparently, This was used quite a lot to poison people, but it was rarely fatal. However, some scholars point out that Johnson had an ulcer and esophageal varices, which when coupled with poison may have caused him to hemorrhage. Since his last few days were filled with terrible suffering, including bleeding from the mouth and abdominal pain, it may be true. Another theory was suggested in 2006 by a medical practitioner named David Connell, who after studying the 3 known photographs of Johnson, pointed out the musician's bad eye and unnaturally long fingers. He believes that Johnson may have had Marfan syndrome, which caused his death. All we really know is that Johnson died very young, and since there was no autopsy, we'll never know for sure why. Now, you might be thinking, couldn't someone get permission to exhume his body and find out? Well, sure, except that's another mystery about Johnson. No one knows where he's buried. But there are 3 possible sites. The first is in Mount Zion Missionary Baptist Church near Morgan City, which isn't far from Greenwood. In that cemetery is a 1-ton obelisk that lists all of his songs, which was placed there in 1990. Columbia Records and the cemetery itself paid for the monument. Then there's the small marker in Quito, Mississippi, in the Payne Chapel Cemetery. This marker was erected in 1990 by an Atlanta rock group called the Tombstones. They chose this spot after seeing an article about Johnson and a quote from one of his ex-girlfriends who said that he was buried there. In 2000, a gravedigger's wife came forward and said that Johnson was buried under a pecan tree in Greenwood's Little Zion Church Cemetery. Sony Music paid for the marker that exists today. Now, because Johnson died pretty much penniless, he literally didn't own anything when he died except for his guitar. It's also believed that he was buried in an unmarked pauper's grave, or potter's field, that is still yet to be found. His guitar, by the way? Well, that has also been lost to history. A little bit ago, I had mentioned that David Connell, the medical practitioner, had come to his own conclusion about how Johnson died, based on the 3 photographs that exist of Johnson himself. Now, I'm not sure you may have all picked up on that there are only 3 known photographs of Robert Johnson, which is kind of strange, right? I mean, here was a young man who was desperate to become famous. He was young and good-looking, and yet, other than those who knew him, nobody had any idea what he looked like until the 1980s. And even then, there were only 2 pictures. So why just 2? You would think that he would have jumped at any chance that he could to have his picture taken. But both of the photos that were released to the public came from his half-sister, Carrie Thompson. She had given them to music historian Stephen Levere, who agreed to split any royalties with the Johnson family 50-50. The first photo, known as the dime store photo, was first published in Rolling Stone magazine in 1986. In the dime store photo, Johnson is wearing a white shirt and has his guitar in his hands. He is posed with an unlit cigarette in his mouth. The second photo of Mr. Johnson, known as the studio photo, was published in a 1989 article in 78 Quarterly. The studio photo shows Johnson dressed in a stylish pinstripe suit. He has a great fedora on his head, a white handkerchief in his breast pocket, and a smile on his face. He's also holding his guitar across his body with his hands posed as if he's in mid-song. For almost 2 decades, those were the only 2 images anyone had of Johnson. In one, he's a dapper young musician, ready to take on the world. In the other, he's a brooding loner with a haunted and tired look in his eyes. It's not hard to see the polar opposites when all you have are the 2 photos and they're so different from each other. It's easy to make assumptions about a legend involving deals with the devil, when that's all you have to go on. But then, in 2020, Johnson's stepsister, Annie Anderson, released a third photo to the public. This one was also taken in a photo booth, like the dime store photo. But in it, Johnson looks completely relaxed and completely at ease, as if he's just happy to be there in that moment. Same white shirt as before, same guitar, only this time he holds the guitar upright and at an angle, and a wide, easy smile fills his face. When you look at those two photos side by side, you can almost hear him thinking, okay, now in this one, I'm going to try and look serious. It creates an entirely new perspective to have 3 photos. And it turns out that there is a fourth photo, although this fourth one has never been made public, since it has been locked in a legal battle between the Johnson family and the Smithsonian. Just to be clear, the Smithsonian did not steal this photo in any way, and they did not obtain it through any nefarious means. But it's a rather complicated story. In fact, all of Robert Johnson's photos are part of a complicated story, since various descendants are claiming legal ownership of them. But I'm not going to get into that, since that's not really the point of our episode. Our point really is that the legends of Robert Johnson are as huge as his talent was. And really, it's his talent that should be celebrated. And I think the most important thing is that artists ever since the 1920s certainly have celebrated him. What I mean by that is that, thank goodness, musicians since then have recognized his genius and continued to give him credit. I had mentioned before that Chuck Berry, Bob Dylan, Keith Richards, and Robert Plant were strongly influenced by Johnson's music. But so are many others, like Bonnie Raitt and Johnny Winter. And many others have covered Robert Johnson's songs, like his song Traveling Riverside Blues, which has been covered by Led Zeppelin, Cream, Eric Clapton, Lynyrd Skynyrd, The Doors, and the Allman Brothers. Johnson's legacy continued well beyond his lifetime, just as it should have. And his legend continues to be retold in popular culture also. Like Beth had said at the start of the episode, it was part of a supernatural episode. So, is it fair to keep perpetuating the idea that a young blues musician may have gotten his talent from the devil rather than from 18 months of very hard work, very long hours of practice, and natural talent? Probably not. Which is why it's so important for me to tell the whole story. That a young, talented man died young. And not only was his talent considered a mystery during his lifetime, when it probably shouldn't have been, his cause of death was ignored, and his place of burial were unmarked. All things that shouldn't have happened.
But if I hadn't heard about Robert Johnson in that supernatural episode, I may have never heard about him. So in a way, it's kind of a catch-22.
Right. Because you're seeing his story portrayed in modern day time with a lot of false narratives, right?
Right.
And the thing is, at least you get to know his story, and maybe if you go do some research, you'll find out what's really going on with Robert Johnson. So it is a starting off point, although, like I said, these modern day stories, they're not right.
Right. But at the very least, I think the first thing that people do when they hear of his legend is they listen to his music.
Right. And that's a good thing.
And that's the most important thing, is that people are still listening to his music.
Right. Either way, it's bringing attention to him.
Right.
And they eventually find out the truth.
Right.
But with that said, we had also mentioned that Johnson wasn't the only Delta blues artist to be tied to the Crossroads legend of making a deal with the devil. There was his mentor, Ike Zimmerman, and there was Tommy Johnson. Beth mentioned this before, well, at least a little bit, when she said that Robert Johnson's young wife's family, had blamed him for her death because he played the blues. Although the blues began around 1860, when the country was at brink of civil war, the Delta blues took off in the 1920s, which was also a time of great strife in the United States. The blues were often a way for black singers to express their feelings of oppression and struggle. It was gritty, and it was filled with code words. In other words, it was powerful. And so rumors began that blues music and the singers that performed it must be linked to the devil in some kind of way. And the immensely talented and popular Tommy Johnson was no exception. Tommy Johnson was born on a Crystal Springs, Mississippi plantation in 1896. He was one of 11 children, and he learned to play guitar from his older brother, Liddell. In fact, in his younger years, he often performed with Liddell and their brother, Major. And he was good, but he wasn't great. As a teen, Tommy ran away to the Delta and was gone for 2 years. When he returned, his guitar playing was infinitely better. The brothers decided to make a go of it in the Delta, and together with their wives, they moved to another plantation in Drew, Mississippi. Tommy quickly befriended several of the Clarksdale's blues musicians, but he also traveled a lot, just like Robert Johnson, who, by the way, he wasn't related to at all. And he was also an alcoholic, just like Robert Johnson. His first recorded song, called Canned Heat Blues, was about his habit of drinking sterno cooking fuel when he couldn't afford bottled liquor. And yes, if you're wondering if the 1960s rock band Canned Heat took their name from this song, well, they did. According to the City of Clarksdale website, Tommy Johnson was able to do some amazing things with his voice because of his vocal range. He could growl, or he could sing in falsetto. Howling Wolf was greatly influenced by Tommy's singing style. And according to the ParanormalScholar.com, his performances were legendary. He would play his guitar behind his neck, between his knees, and while holding it in midair. He's credited with influencing pretty much every rock singer afterwards that performed the same way. Allegedly, the rumors about Tommy making a deal with the devil began while he was still young. And unlike Robert Johnson, who never confirmed or denied any of the rumors about him, Tommy Johnson allegedly confirmed them about himself. Now, at some point, Tommy's brother Liddell stopped performing, swore off the blues as devil's music, and became a preacher. And then, a decade after Tommy's death, Liddell said some pretty interesting things about his brother in a 1966 interview. He said, quote, "Now if Tommy was living, he'd tell you. He said the reason he knowed so much, said he sold himself to the devil. I asked him how. He said, if you want to learn how to play anything you want to play and learn how to make songs yourself, you take your guitar and you go to where a road crosses that way, where a crossroads is. Get there. Be sure to get there a little 12 o'clock that night so you'll know you'll be there. You have your guitar and be playing a piece there by yourself. A big black man will walk up there and take your guitar and he'll tune it. And then he'll play a piece and hand it back to you. That's the way I learned to play anything I want." Now, of course, Tommy wasn't able to defend himself, but Major, his other brother, was furious at Liddell for saying such things about their brother. Now, I should also mention that in the same interview, Liddell also claimed that one time he was chased by a winged serpent while he was out riding his bicycle. He was not Tommy. Unlike Robert Johnson, Tommy Johnson's death at the age of 60 was not a mystery, and his burial site is not a mystery either. He's buried in the Warm Springs Methodist Church Cemetery outside of Crystal Springs. And every year since 2006, the annual Tommy Johnson's Blues Festival is held in Crystal Springs. Tommy Johnson's legacy lives on in other ways, too. Many musical artists in all genres have mentioned Tommy's influence on their music and their stage performances, including Muddy Waters, Jimi Hendrix, and Stevie Ray Vaughan. But it's interesting that so many major blues figures were tied to the Crossroads legend, and that in the case of Robert Johnson, it didn't really begin until after the legend about Tommy spread, almost 30 years after Robert died. Since there's so much mystery around Robert Johnson and how he died, why he died, where he's buried, and his lyrics, the legend tying Robert Johnson to the devil at the Crossroads has endured for almost 70 years. But his musical influence on musicians of all genres have endured for almost 90 years, which says far more about his talent than anything else.
It really does. I learned a lot of different things from researching
this episode?
Yeah.
Right.
Like, I don't think I knew who Tommy Johnson was, because when I saw Oh Brother, Where Art Thou, I thought they just changed Robert Johnson's name to Tommy Johnson. You know? Yeah. I'm sure you knew, but I didn't know.
Yeah. Well, do you remember quite a few years back, at the beginning of our relationship, we watched a documentary on Robert Johnson.
We did?
Yeah.
Oh.
It was really good. And after doing the episode, I think I'll go look it up again.
Yeah, we should. See what they have to say, about all of it.
Right.
And I think his story, too, says more about the time period.
Yeah. It really wasn't a good time. Like they said, the Civil War was just starting, right?
When the blues started, yeah.
Right.
But then in the 1920s and 30s, you've got the Great Depression, you've got Jim Crow laws, you've got, the Dust Bowl, you've got all of those things happening.
All the things going on in Mississippi that were just horrendous anyway.
Right. Yeah, it's a very, very interesting story. And I'm glad we covered him finally.
I just think it's sickening that how they think that a black musician couldn't have talent of his own, that he would have. The only way that he could have talent was to sell his soul to the devil.
Right.
It's disgusting.
Right. And that's what I was alluding to when I said, the time period. But I'm glad you came out and said it. But that's basically what it is.
I wonder what all those people would think now.
I don't know. Yeah. Yeah. But hopefully, too, well, I don't know. I was going to say hopefully perhaps the family will release more photos of him. But then at the same time, I don't know if it matters. But it would give a bigger picture of what he was like. When you only have 3 photos to go on and you have preconceived notions about this legend, you're going to look at those photos with that legend in mind.
Right.
Well,
there you have it. The legend of Robert Johnson.
And if you'd like to know more, you can always check our sources in our show notes, which include not just stuff about Robert Johnson, but Tommy Johnson, too. And a little bit about Ike Zimmerman.
Yeah, a little bit. Well, I think that about wraps it up for this episode, Beth.
I think so.
Join us again next week for an all-new episode of Where Our Minds Wander.
See you soon. Thank you for joining us. We look forward to traveling with you again to the places where our minds wander.
If you like what you heard, please take a moment and provide us with a 5-star rating and a comment on your favorite listening platform. It really helps us move up the list and become more visible on the podcast charts so new people can find us.
And thank you all for your continued support.
See you next week for an all-new episode.